Hello, this is Miss Kyler, and I'm really excited to bring you this lecture on Byron, Shelley, and Keats. These are three of the most passionate poets of the Romantic period, and really, like I've said in an earlier lecture, they're like the rock stars of the Romantic period. They were rebels, they set trends, and they had pretty tragic lives for the most part. Okay, so first of all, I'm going to read this over for you, and then I'm going to stop now and then and point out some key points that you should know. So this is the Destruction of Sennacherib by Lord Byron, and it's based on a story from the Book of Kings in the Bible. The Assyrian came down like the wolf on the fold, and his cohorts were gleaming in purple and gold, and the sheen of their spears was like stars on the sea when the blue wave rolls nightly on deep Galilee. Like the leaves of the forest when summer is green, that host with their banners at sunset were seen. Like the leaves of the forest when autumn hath blown, that host on the morrow lay withered and strown. So some of the things I want you to notice are, of course, central detail, very vivid detail description, and similes. So a simile is a comparison that uses like or as. The Assyrian came down like the wolf on the fold. Already we have, by comparing the Assyrian to a wolf on the fold, we see how the Assyrian is dangerous, wild, vicious, and the fold, which is the little helpless sheep, those are the Israeli armies, and they're helpless, passive, they're in danger. So look, it's already establishing that helplessness and the imminent victory of the Assyrians. In the second stanza, we have a more complex simile. It's comparing the leaves of the forest in certain seasons to the state of the Assyrian army. So the leaves of the forest are like the soldiers. So like the leaves of the forest when summer is green, okay, here we have an army that is vibrant, full of life, strong, healthy, and in a moment, the next couple lines, like the leaves of the forest when autumn hath blown, just with a few words, he already establishes the quick transformation of a strong, vivid army to the crumbling, withering, dead army, like the leaves in the autumn. Okay, so let's continue on. For the angel of death spread his wings on the blast, and breathed in the face of the foe as he passed, and the eyes of the sleepers waxed deadly and chill, and their hearts but once heaved and for ever grew still. And there lay the steed, with his nostril all wide, and through it there rolled not the breath of his pride. And the foam of his gasping lay wide on the turf, and cold as the spray of the rock-beating surf. I really love the central detail that we have in this poem. And as you can see, he's dwelling in the state of the defeated enemy. So instead of choosing to write about the Israeli army and how they are fearful, anticipating, and then finally victorious, we're looking at the Assyrians as they move from dying to dead, the face of the foe. And he's connecting these words with alliteration. Blast, breathe, face, foe, hearts heaved. It's just really amazing, this perfect word choices that he has here, just to create this very, very visual and very sensory detailed poem. He's using this imagery, visual, something we can see, and organic, and something that is happening inside us in our organs, like the gasping, in our lungs, and the hearts heaving, and auditory, so something we can hear, like the gasping again. And in the Romantic period, hearts don't murmur, they don't beat, they heave. So everything is always very passionate. Also, the sympathy for the alienated and the defeated foe is very Byronic. It's something that Byron, he invented that Byronic hero, the alienated, dark character who is wronged by society and feels justified in wreaking revenge. So this is very Romantic period, typical of the Romantic period. The entire stanza is dedicated to one noble steed. Again, this steed is pretty emblematic of the Romantic period. It's the nature that has been harnessed, that's meant to be free and wild and untamed, and we look at it not in its tame mode, but in its wild throes of death, with the nostril all wide. We look at the foam coming out of his nostril, and the idea about him having pride, this very noble beast, very much a part of the Romantic period, and Byron himself had a great admiration for horses. Now we get to the rider, and there lay the rider, distorted and pale, with the dew on his brow and the rust on his mail. And the tents were all silent, the banners alone, the lances unlifted, the trumpet unblown. And the widows of Asher are loud in their wail, and the idols are broke in the temple of Baal. And the might of the Gentile, unsmote by the sword, hath melted like snow in the glance of the Lord. And okay, so again, we have this, detail, and the idea that we're not dwelling on the beautiful, tame, or we're not talking about things in symmetrical detail, but everything is distorted. We're looking at the nightmarish darkness, and we're looking at the beauty of ugliness, almost, as it were. Everything has to be passionate. Nothing's ever symmetrical, smooth, pretty. Everything is seen in its passionate, distorted detail. And this whole poem is about an event that happened in the Bible, the Book of Kings, when there was no way the Israeli army would ever succeed against this huge force coming against them. And without the Israelis ever even raising a finger, God defeats the enemy. Okay? I want you to understand a few details. There's Lord Byron again. And I want you to know that this is in anapestic tetrameter. Okay, so anapestic tetrameter is 4 feet with 2 unstressed syllables followed by 1 stressed syllable. We talked a little bit about iambic pentameter. With anapestic tetrameter, you see those little loops, and then the slashes. The loops are the unstressed syllables, the slashes are the stressed syllable, and you have loop, loop, stress, loop, loop, stress, loop, loop, stress, loop, loop, stress. Okay, so you have 1, 2, 3, 4 of those groupings. That means is the tetrameter, and anapestic is the fact that we have unstressed, unstressed, stressed. Okay, and the reason he does that is to make it mimetic of horses' galloping hooves. We never stop. You can keep reading. You can hear the galloping hooves when you read it out loud. The Assyrian came down like the wolf on the fold. And it's in rhyming couplets, which means that you have 2 adjacent lines that rhyme. Fold, gold, see, Galilee. Okay? All right, so let's go ahead and move on to Percy Shelley. And he wrote an ode to the West Wind. The Romantics like to write odes. And whenever you write an ode, you always dedicate it to something that's not really there, or something that does not necessarily can't speak back to you. So we have ode to a skylark, ode to a Grecian urn, ode to the West Wind. Okay, so an ode is a long, often elaborate, stanzaic poem of varying line lengths, etc., etc. And most of the odes are written or dedicated to a specific subject. Okay. Ode to the West Wind is about the winds that bring change of season in England. Now the Romantics, remember, there's all this upheaval with all these revolutions, with including the Industrial Revolution, and so they were dealing with upheaval and change. And Ode to the West Wind, I'm not going to read it to you, it's kind of long, but do read it and see if you follow the changes of seasons. See how it changes from one season to the next, and relating the changes to what's happening in England. So, big theme of the Romantic period, and specifically of this poem, is mutability. And the idea of mutability is mourning and yet accepting upheaval and change. You have to deal with it. It's happening. Embrace it. Again, it's an ode is dedicated to the West Wind. He's talking to the West Wind, so that's an apostrophe. He's addressing the wind as if it were a person that could answer back. Another note is that Shelley had recently lost his child, and many feel the line, "I fall upon the thorns of life, I bleed," to be uncharacteristically maudlin for Shelley. I mean, that's kind of the idea that it's over the top, a little too melodramatic. But he was going through a lot at the time, and he was feeling very melancholic with many tragedies. In fact, he had lost his son recently, so there was a reason why he would feel melancholy. And there's a picture. Shelley feels like the leaves in the wind. He feels helpless and tossed by events greater than he can bear. He's wondering, can I ever be a poet again? I need to be inspired by something new. Okay, so now we're going to talk about Keats. He wrote a sonnet called On First Looking into Chapman's Homer. Much have I travelled in the realms of gold, and many goodly states and kingdoms seen. Round many western islands have I been, which bards in fealty to Apollo hold. Oft of one wide expanse had I been told, that deep-browed Homer ruled as his domain. Yet did I never breathe its pure serene, till I heard Chapman speak out loud and bold. Then felt I like some watcher of the skies, when a new planet swims into his ken, or like stout Cortez, when with eagle eyes he stared at the Pacific, and all his men looked at each other with a wild surmise, silent upon a peak in Darien. Okay, so I want you to look at that picture right there. That is the original Greek version of the Odyssey. And here he's traveling in realms of gold. So when he's talking about realms of gold, he's talking about the gold threading that many books are lined with. And he's just, he's comparing books to undiscovered worlds and reading to traveling. So you see the original Greek, and you can understand why Keats was so amazed and how he felt this was such a big discovery. When you struggle to try to translate that, you're not going to have much fun. You're not going to really engage in the story unless you become really expert in Greek. Okay, so as I said, it's an Italian sonnet, and here we have the poem all there. Now the first part that I've bracketed off is the octave, and like we've talked about earlier, the octave is where you present the quandary or the question. And the question here is, how do I enjoy these ancient works when I must first fight with ancient Greek text? We have to battle with a deep-browed Homer in his domain before we can even understand what is being said. And the solution in that last bracketed part is in the sestet, and that's the last 6 lines. And the solution is that a reading of Chapman's brilliant English translation, now I can truly enjoy the wonders of the Iliad and Odyssey. There's something a little bit unusual about this poem. The volta, which usually occurs at the beginning of the sestet, here it's a bit earlier. It's still in the octave, with the word yet, showing the turn in the mode. Okay? All right, so a couple of other things I want to point out. The similes. So we have some really interesting similes here. They're actually extended similes. So what Keats is saying is that the way he feels when he discovers Chapman's Homer is the way that an astronomer feels when discovering a brand new planet. So it's not just a simple simile of Keats equals an astronomer. It's an extended simile. The way he feels is that whole scenario there. And the same thing with the last one there. Or like stout Cortez, when with eagle eyes he stared at the Pacific, and all his men looked at each other with wild surmise, silent upon a peak in Darien. So you can just imagine, here is, Cortez with his men going over a mountain. Lo and behold, a whole ocean, a whole huge part of the world that they never even knew existed is suddenly before their eyes. And so that is just the same amazement that Keats feels when he is understanding the Homer when it's in the English translation. One last little thing is the historical error. Yes, we know that Cortez did not discover the Pacific Ocean in reality. It was Balboa that discovered the Pacific. But it sounds good in the poem, and Keats is allowed a little license in that case. I hope you enjoyed the lecture. Thanks. Bye.